Welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, and I'll be the host this time around. Both Don Cooney and Lynn Bartley are off on assignment this month, as we say. But we do have a very special guest with us in the studio today, Dr. Paul Clements, who is a professor of political science at Western Michigan University. He's also the director of the master's program in international development administration there. And he has declared his candidacy for the 6th Congressional District here in Michigan. And so, Paul, welcome to Critical Issues. Actually back. You've been on the program several times, so welcome back. So let's concentrate on your campaign this time around. And why don't you tell us first a little bit about yourself, give us some background, and then we'll talk about why you're going to throw your hat into the ring, as they say.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ron. Thanks for welcoming me back to the show. As you said, I'm a professor of political science at Western Michigan University. I've been there since 1996 for 17 years. I direct our master's program in international development administration. And in that position, I teach national development strategies about how countries such as China, India, Taiwan, Korea, Brazil, other countries around the world, how their governments have managed their economies. I helped to start our interdisciplinary doctoral program in evaluation. I'm one of the founding faculty members of that program, and I teach evaluation. Most summers I'm overseas somewhere doing some kind of evaluation work for, last year for USAID, US government, for different nonprofit organizations. Here in Kalamazoo, I was a founding chairperson of the Kalamazoo Interfaith Coalition for Peace and Justice. We got started in the run-up to the Iraq War, which we were opposing. We didn't think the Iraq War was a good idea. I'm a member of First Presbyterian Church in Kalamazoo, and I've been very active on our outreach committee. In that capacity, I've been our representative to the Michigan Organizing Project and Michigan United that are faith-based. Michigan Organizing Project is a faith-based social justice organization. With Michigan United, we've joined up with the Alliance for Immigration Rights, Immigrant Rights, and we've been promoting comprehensive immigration reform. If you want to go back a little bit further from that.
Well, you were in the Peace Corps, right?
I started, well, I want to
go back even further than that,
further.
Right? Sure.
I was born in Texas, but most of my childhood was spent in Hong Kong and India.
Okay.
My dad was a social worker. My parents were Methodist missionaries. My dad started a social service agency in Hong Kong. In India, they were working in the slums of Bombay with the community and economic development programs of the Methodist Church. I did my undergraduate work at Harvard in social science. Then after that, I joined Peace Corps.
Okay.
From my experience in India, I was interested in international development. Peace Corps sent me to the Gambia in West Africa, where I was a math teacher. I finished up my 2 years there. I wanted to work in international development, so I got a job with a British nonprofit ActionAid, after that with USAID. After 5 years in the Gambia, where I met my wife, who's from Ireland.
Yeah.
I did my graduate study after that, and that was all at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. Their program is in public affairs, public policy. So that sort of gave me a broad grounding in the economics and politics of public policy, healthcare economics, different sort of macroeconomics, and then still my focus was on international development at that time. From there I came to here in 1996, and then we kind of already covered that part.
Yeah, yeah. So you've had a lot of international experience, as they say, living abroad and working various parts of the world.
Yeah.
So that gives you a sort of a broader perspective, I would suspect, on a lot of politics in the United States as well.
It really does, but I've also really come to love Kalamazoo. Both my daughters went to Kalamazoo Public Schools, and my family's been very involved in the life of the Kalamazoo community. And this is a great community, and the civic life here is really cooperative, really supportive. And it's very different from what we see in Congress. And I sort of hope to take some of that culture with me to Congress, if and when I get there.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this congressional campaign now.
Sure.
So why? What motivated you to seek this office? And we'll talk a little bit about what the main issues are, but what's the main thing that sort of got you going on this campaign?
Well, like a lot of people, I'm pretty unhappy with the way Congress is working these days, and I think Fred Upton, our congressman, is more part of the problem than part of the solution. He's been a major contributor to the gridlock that we've seen in Congress, and I'd be happy to talk about the details of that down the line. The specific issue that pushed me across the edge into running for Congress has been his turnaround on climate change.
Okay.
And I know we've talked about that on this show before. But climate change is the greatest challenge facing humanity in this century. If we don't come to grips with it, the consequences are a lot worse than most people have figured out. And Fred Upton, as our congressman, is chairman of the most powerful committee in the House in the climate change issue. And in that position, he has directly obstructed the government from moving forward on steps to address climate change. I don't want to spend too much time on it right now, but if we don't take care of it, Michigan is likely to be 4 or 5 degrees hotter by the end of the century. We're likely to have a climate more like Texas than like what we have today. And so part of my candidacy is to ask the voters of the 6th District to take another look at climate change and to see if they want to hold their congressman accountable for blocking the country and really the world from taking action on that.
And Upton has basically shifted his position on this, right? At one point, he seemed to be aware of the issue of climate change. He had something on his website saying that, we needed to consider all the different kind of options to deal with it. And then it appears that there was a major change in his position. It seemed to coincide with him getting challenged by someone in a Republican primary several times, and it also seems to coincide with him being challenged within his own party for the chairmanship of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And then all of a sudden it seems like Upton's position is, that thing on his website comes down, and all of a sudden he's authoring a Wall Street Journal editorial with somebody from Americans for Prosperity, basically challenging the whole issue of climate change. And then introduces legislation to strip the Environmental Protection Agency of its ability to regulate greenhouse gases. Didn't he do that as well?
I mean, everything you say is exactly right. Here's a congressman who at first said, we need to be taking steps to regulate greenhouse gases. But then when he was when he was promoted to chairmanship of the House committee that would have responsibility to do that, he did a turnaround. And I can't see into his mind, but it seems as though that may have been the price he had to pay to get that chairmanship, or perhaps it had to do with being confronted by someone further to his right in the political spectrum, and that conservative challenge. But the fundamental issue here is that climate change is real, and he knew it was real. But then after he got that chairmanship, he's on record saying that, well, the science, we're not so sure about that. We're not really sure if we need to do something about that. And the consequences for you and I and for our children and grandchildren are really pretty bad of that kind of turnaround. But that's just one example of how Upton has really changed as a congressman, I think, in the experience, in the lifetime of the period he's been in Congress.
Right.
Here in West Michigan.
Which is what, 24 years?
He's been there for 26 years.
26
This is, I believe, his 27th year.
Okay.
And he has, over most of that period, pretty much had a reputation as kind of a moderate, reasonable Republican, someone who would go and discuss on both sides. But in the last 4 years, he's changed dramatically. When the Democrats had the control of the House, he didn't support any single major appropriations bill. And then in the last couple of years, he's really gone pretty much in lockstep with the increasingly conservative Republican leadership of the House. The 6th District is a kind of a moderate district. And the Republican Party as a whole has moved in a more extreme direction than the voters in this district. And he's gone with the party.
Right. Yeah, there are a number of political scientists and political commentators who have been writing recently about the Republican Party, and they're the sort of the consensus view, I think, among a lot of those folks who study Congress is that the Republican Party today is the most extremist party that we've seen in the U.S. political scene in quite some time.
Yeah, I believe that's true.
And Fred Upton has, jumped right in there with them. So we talk about the congressional gridlock that we have today, and I think a lot of that is the fact that the Republican Party has become so extreme in its positions, and therefore almost complete opposition to anything that the president or the Democratic Party would offer.
Yeah, pretty much anything with Obama's name on it, he's been against.
Yeah.
He had a chance when he was on the super committee a year and a half ago. He had a chance to come up with a budget deal. He was one of 12 Congress people and senators on that committee, 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans. And if he had struck a deal, then we would have a budget. We wouldn't have the sequester that's having really harmful consequences all over the country.
Yeah.
So when I talk to people around the district, and I've talked to quite a few of them, I just mentioned that I'm running against Upton. And the most common response I get is, I voted for him a few times, or quite a few times, but I'm just not very happy with him. He's just gone so far to the right. He's just been so extreme. And I think that gives me an opportunity to get my message out of a more positive vision for government, of addressing some of the really critical problems that our country faces, where this gridlock is not allowing us to move forward.
Yeah, I sense just a lot of frustration among people about the inability of Congress to get anything done, and a lot of dissatisfaction with Fred Upton and the fact that he has become part of the problem and not part of the solution. So we can come back and talk about climate change. That's a huge issue, the most important issue that we face today. You're an expert on that issue, and we can certainly come back and talk about that issue some more. But what are some of the other major issues that you see important part of this campaign?
Sure. When I think about the different programs and policies that I'm promoting, and I've tried to organize those ideas, I'm putting it in 3 broad areas. I think we need an inclusive democracy, a strong economy, and a sustainable future. And that for our democracy and for our economy, we're going to be strongest when we're building on the real participation, the meaningful participation of all of our citizens. When I look at Upton's policies and try to figure out what are the organizing ideas there, he really seems to be working with this idea of an unregulated free market. And a free market can be very helpful for competition in an economy, but by itself, it cannot solve many of the problems that we face as a country. You add to that a situation where in our democracy, people with wealth, the people who have a lot of money, can to some extent buy political influence. We have large corporations that have a lot of lobbyists, and if they can be involved in writing the rules of the economic system, which they are today, then you talk about a free market, but a free market that's tilted in favor of the people who can write those rules, who are basically the really wealthy corporations and such. Even then, the really sensible policies like infrastructure that business itself needs for its own profitability, we can't even get the taxes and the support to build the infrastructure that we need. And again, that's generally speaking where Upton's policies go. A step further than that, and that is that in terms of his political operations, he's become more and more dependent on major contributions from the very corporations that he's supposed to be regulating in his position as chair of House Energy and Commerce Committee. One piece of information is that in the last election, he spent $5.4 million. Well, 80% of that money came from outside of Michigan. In the last just 3 months, he's raised $300,000, with a very large part of that from the very corporations that he's regulating in his chairmanship. And so in terms of the problems that we face as a country, dealing with those problems, he's both not contributing to the solutions, and he's using his influence often to support very narrow economic interests of corporations that have a lot of power and money.
I think you political scientists have a term, regulatory capture, which does talk about the agencies themselves being very much influenced and controlled by the corporations that they're supposed to be regulating, and that extends clearly into the Congress itself. And so I think advocates like Fred Upton for a free market, an unregulated free market, talk a lot about liberty and freedom, but it seems that they do not recognize the whole existence of economic externalities, the kind of costs that are imposed on the public by corporations, or by the existence of what some authors have called corporate tyranny, the fact that corporations, if they exert too much power in our system and are able to impose those externalities and are able to escape from any kind of meaningful regulation, then become a force against the liberty of our people. It's not just government that can infringe on liberty, it's also can come from that kind of unchecked private power. And so it seems to me that we need a Congress that's going to be able to exercise a reasonable degree of that kind of regulation over private power.
Right. I mean, you've put a lot on the table, and I'm largely in agreement with what you've said. I think that in terms of our congressmen, it comes out most clearly in the energy area, because that's an area where what you talk about is externalities, that he's regulating the nuclear industry, the coal and gas industry, and in that context, he's cut the budget of the Environmental Protection Agency. He's pushed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to not really fully impose its own safety regulations on the nuclear power plants that it's supposed to be regulating. So again, he's dependent to some extent for his campaign financing on these and other corporations, and then you can't tell about the motivation here, whether it's because of campaign contributions or whether it's because of a very narrow free market ideology. But with things like the coal industry, where the pollution from the coal then has all kinds of bad health effects. Well, it's the EPA that's supposed to be controlling that, but he's cutting the EPA budget so that they have a harder time with that. With nuclear, the externality would be the risk that we face in Palisades, here in West Michigan, from if there's a problem. He's been really a cheerleader for the nuclear industry and stopping and holding the Nuclear Regulatory Commission back from imposing its own safety regulations. But then when they have a problem, he goes and marches in and says, okay, we have to shut this plant down. So there's a little bit of inconsistency there. But I want to get back to your earlier question, and that is about the liberties and freedoms that we enjoy as citizens in the United States. And to some extent, what you say, those liberties and freedoms are curtailed by the power of corporations. That when corporations can write the rules, like right now we have the banking regulations are being worked out right now in Congress. And we've learned that the very banks that we're supposed to be regulating are the ones who are writing a lot of the text for these. And we had a situation, our economic collapse, that the recession we got into in 2008 was substantially driven by banks being too big to fail. I mean, banks that made some bad decisions, but then if a small company in Michigan makes bad decisions, they go bankrupt. When these big banks made bad decisions, then we, the taxpayer, went and bailed them out. Now we have a situation where, partly because of the influence of these banks, they're once again too big to fail. And now these very banks are writing the regulations that are going to be used to supposedly regulate them. So they have this kind of implicit guarantee. So the point is that in terms of just economic freedoms, that people who have wealth, given the possibility of translating that wealth into influence, such as we see with Fred Upton, have a real advantage, and most of us really don't. But I want to go back even further than that, and say that to me, the real value, the real importance of American democracy is based on the freedoms and liberties that it provides to you and I and to all of us as citizens. And that when the United States, when our democracy got started, people didn't know if democracy was even going to work.
Right.
But we're now the longest standing democracy in history. And today, worldwide, democracy is really the only ideology, political ideology, that really commands broad respect. But we've seen in our own history that over the 200-some years of our democracy, that it's gradually become more and more inclusive. That at first African Americans were not participants, then we had the vote extended to women, and then even though African Americans were supposed to have the vote, there was civil rights and these things. Well, one of the things that I think is at the foundation of a democracy is it should support all of its citizens in having the full value of those liberties, the liberties of freedom of speech, of association, of religion, of political participation. And to have the full value of that liberty means that you've got to have a real chance of participating. You know, if you don't have a high school degree, if you're functionally illiterate, then both politically and economically, you don't really have a chance to participate in the system. And that as a democracy, that's a failure of our democracy. So I want to be pushing for a democracy which will, I believe, be both politically and economically stronger when everyone has a meaningful chance to participate. And we've come a long way in that direction, but we still have a ways to go.
And again, if participation in the political process depends on money,
right,
which increasingly it does, then the entire process gets distorted.
Yeah,
and,
part of what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 decades is we've had significant economic growth in the United States, but virtually all the benefits of that growth have gone to the top 20%. And even within that, 70% of it has gone to the top 5%. So we've seen increasing inequality while and this gets to also economic questions. While we have more children in poverty than most of the industrialized countries, our education system is underperforming compared to many industrialized countries. And again, these are problems both economically and in terms of our democracy.
It appears to me that one of the problems with a free market ideology or a libertarian kind of an approach is, again, the failure to recognize the impact of private power, number one. But,
Sure.
But it also seems to me that there's no real sense that there's something called the common good or the public good. And it seems to me that we've lost that conception in our politics, and that it's become so rigid and narrowly partisan that we lose sight that there is supposed to be some larger public or common good. And it seems to me that we need to restore that, and it sounds like that's what you're talking about with this increased participation, to get back a focus on what's good for all of us who are all in this together.
Yeah, no, definitely. But not only that, as a country, we face challenges in this century that are a little bit different from the challenges we faced in the past. And if we don't have a government that can help our country address those challenges, I mean, that's, in terms of our common good, it's partly just getting everyone to participate, but it's also partly facing the issues, the challenges that we face as a country. And here, I'd like to particularly focus on a couple of them. When Upton promotes this free market, one thing that doesn't address is how can we really move our economy forward in terms of the economic environment we're going to be facing in the next 20 or 30 years. I teach international development. I teach about development strategies of other countries. In the United States, in the last 30 or 40 years, we've had average about 2% per person per year economic growth over a long period. China has had average growth of about 9% over a 30-year period. There are other countries such as Taiwan, South Korea, that have had over substantial periods, 25, 30 years, 8 or 9% growth. Now, these countries come from a very different position. We're already developed. They're just developing. But nevertheless, the way they achieved that rapid growth was, we used to think about it's either capitalism or socialism.
Right.
We used to think it's either private sector or government ownership. But that wasn't the question, that wasn't how they worked it out. What they worked out was kind of a synergy, a synergistic relationship where the private sector had most of the ownership, most of the activity of the economy, but where the government was mapping out where the economy needs to be moving 5 or 10 years down the road, specifically in terms of technology, specifically in terms of manufacturing. For Michigan, being a manufacturing state, this is absolutely critical. You know, if we go along the way we are with the companies just being able to invest wherever they like, with government not supporting infrastructure, without having strong education, then we're going to see a continued increase in just low-wage jobs, continued increase in the gap between the rich and the poor. Whereas if we want to have strong manufacturing, what we need to see is the government identifying what are going to be the technologies, where's going to be the manufacturing, where there's going to be greater market, because the good-paying jobs follow that increased technology. And we can have a pretty good idea about that. This comes back partly to the climate change issue, but we can be pretty confident that it'll be clean energy, high technology manufacturing where we're going to see more good jobs, where that'll be the bases for prosperity for societies in the next 30 or 40 years. And that takes government leadership, that takes education, that takes infrastructure, that takes so many things that our federal and to some extent state governments are failing on today. And so in general, I feel as though Fred Upton, our congressman, has not been a very active or strong legislator, not much of a leader. But certainly in terms of these issues, the direction he's promoting isn't solving the problems that we face, and that will be critical for Michigan in our future.
So government does have an important role here, and government has to do some of the planning and has to provide some of the investment to move us in particular directions. And it's not like government doesn't already participate in the economy. I mean, I think it's sort of a gross misunderstanding of how the current system does operate. I mean, if we look to history, government has always played an important and strong role. And we've gotten to a point now where there is a certain ideology that suggests that government can't do anything, Government should completely dissolve almost, you would think, listening to some people. And again, that just simply belies the history. And I mean, you take any of the current strong industries in the United States, there's always been a strong component of governmental involvement and investment there. And it's just now that we need that in an energized way and moving us in some different directions, right?
You know, part of it is just the basic science investment, which our government already contributes to, but that's also under threat with these budget cuts. Part of it is looking to where are going to be the kinds of manufacturing, the kind of markets that will be strong in the future. And here in the district, one of the key areas we know is going to be big in the future is renewable energy, and wind energy is a big part of that. Well, in Kalamazoo Valley Community College, they're training the technicians who do the maintenance on these big windmills that we see. And with 2 years of training, they can be earning $80,000 in their first or second year with with some overtime. You know, they can be earning $100,000 in a few years. Just one example of how the leading technologies is where the good-paying jobs go. One of the ways in which the free market in the United States was slow to get on the boat was in terms of fuel efficiency for cars. And it was really the Obama administration pushing through the CAFE standards, moving it from 27 miles to gallon to 54 miles to the gallon by 2025. Once the administration pushed it forward, the auto industries came on board, partly because I think they see that that's where the market's going to be in the future. Then there are things like just manufacturing extension. And I say this because this is what the other governments are doing. You know, if the other governments are promoting new industries, new technologies, you know, China is the leading contributor to greenhouse gases, but they're also having the greatest growth in export of solar power, solar panels, because the government laid the foundation years ago for that kind of export. if the governments of other countries are supporting their technologies and our government isn't, then we fall further behind. So again, the example I was getting to was what we call manufacturing extension, kind of like agricultural extension in the past.
Right.
And that is following the technologies, the leading technologies, and then looking at the whole array of production and to see, well, how do we get the most useful, cost-effective technologies from the lab to the shop floor and making an investment in that. Things like, we have a big unemployment problem. Well, the United States spends far less on retraining people who lose their jobs than other industrialized countries do. And that's a mistake. That's been shown to be highly cost-effective. That you don't want to just do like how to fill out a resume. You don't want to just do sort of general skills for those unemployed people. You want to look at where is the increasing demand for specific jobs from specific industries or employers, and then give them the training, subsidize the training that helps them get into those jobs, so they have the skill set that they need. And again, this is an example of where other countries are doing it, but we're not.
Right.
And that means that causes us to fall further behind.
And in the long run, this is cost effective, right? I mean, we're going to reap back in terms of the taxes that these people are paying and the contributions they're making to the economy, and that's going to come back and benefit us in the long run. So, we can spend a little bit now and get a lot back later, right?
Right. We need a government that's that's smart, but we need a government that also can be effective.
Right.
In my academic career and my career as a scholar, I've really focused on evaluation a lot, and I can say that one of my main efforts as a scholar has been to promote evaluation for cost effectiveness in foreign aid, because I've seen so many development projects that just waste money, that just end up being ineffective.
Right.
And partly it's because they haven't had that kind of reliable evaluation for cost effectiveness. I want to see our government be as cost effective and efficient as it can be, and I have the training to push that. But it also needs to be able to accomplish some things. And this gridlock that we have today, and this ideology of government government ought to be out of everything, is stopping us from solving those problems.
Yeah, it's hurting our country.
Right.
It's hurting our country.
Then another piece that comes into that is education. Can we move to there?
Sure.
Yeah. There are a lot of places where I agree with President Obama, but one place where I think his strategy has really been mistaken, and the Bush administration before him and the Snyder administration here in Michigan, is on education. And I want to say that this is important partly for our democracy, because without an educated citizenry, there can't be informed participation in the civic life and community life, and also equally for our economy, that if we don't have the best educated population in the world, then the countries that do have better education are going to be getting more of those good jobs in the future. Well, the problem is that in the last 10 years, the strategies of government has mostly been hurting the problem rather than helping it. Both No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top, these federal programs, have put much more reliance on standardized testing than really makes any sense. I'm an evaluation specialist, and so you look at standardized testing and you say, what the idea is you're going to test the kids at the beginning of the year, test them at the end of the year, and then base the teacher's payment, whether the teacher can stay in his or her job, on the difference between those test scores. But we know that there are so many other factors than the teacher that influence what that change might be. We also know that what's being tested on these standardized tests is just a narrow portion of what's important for the child's education.
Right.
That if a teacher wants to help a kid to learn how to think, how to come to grips with problems, how to understand issues, a lot of that is not being covered on these tests. And so the teachers are being pushed to teach to the test.
Right.
The teachers today, I have spoken with many of them, they feel like they're under attack. They feel like that they're being blamed for problems for which in many cases they're just not responsible.
Right.
And that then what's being imposed upon them, they know it doesn't work. And that's causing a lot of good teachers to look at leaving the field, go and find some other jobs.
Right.
We've had too rapid a push towards charter schools. the foundation of the American public education system is public schools. I think there is a role for charter schools, but they have to be held to the same accountability as the public schools. We've pushed too far too fast, and we've seen right here in Michigan that many of the charter schools perform even less well than the public schools. At the same time, by pushing to charter schools, that then even undermines the public schools.
Which to me is the whole purpose of charter schools, is to undermine public education, coming from, again, that extreme ideology.
Yeah.
But,
I mean,
nonetheless.
Part of it is ideologically driven. Part of it's profit driven.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you open it to the private sector, and they're gonna get the best deal they can. You know, if they're driven by profit, then they're going to say, if we can get the contract for this school, you know, how can we then make the most money out of this school?
Right.
And that's not a way to build good education. One thing that I do agree with in terms of the current administrations is Obama and also Snyder have been pushing better preschool. And this is one of the areas where it's really sad that we've waited this long to come to it, because the evidence is absolutely clear. I mean, Tim Bartik here at the Upjohn Institute and other economists have shown that for $1 of investment in good quality preschool, the economic payback is sometimes $3, sometimes $7, sometimes $14, depending upon how you look at it. The reduction in crime down the road. You know, if you have kids who are entering primary school without that good foundation, then that continues all the way through. And so we know that good quality primary school, good quality kindergarten and preschool is just really, really helpful. It's economically helpful because it then immediately gives the parents more confidence to go out and more time to go out and get another job. But even the reforms we see right now are just moving us from maybe 30-40% in good quality preschool to maybe 50-60%. So we have a ways to go there also.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. From a criminological perspective, my discipline, there's been a lot of writing about the impact of early education programs and other early intervention programs in reducing delinquency. And again, what it's addressing one of the key variables that the teachers have to confront, and that is the family economic background. I mean, the evidence is very clear that, you know, school success is related to family income, right? So that middle-class kids come to school with food in their stomachs, number one, but also they have acquired some cultural and social capital from the family that allows them to be more successful in the school setting. And again, this is something that teachers can't control, right? They can't control the family background of the kids coming into their classroom, and then if they have to teach to the test, and you know, they're also dealing with this other hurdle. So yeah, the early education that gets these kids that are coming out of more impoverished backgrounds up to speed is a critical factor.
Yeah,
so.
We've all heard that the United States, the school kids do less well on some of these tests than kids in other industrialized countries. But United States, we also have more child poverty than these other industrialized countries. So one interesting statistic is that if you corrected for income, that if here in the States, if we had the same income distribution, the same percentage of kids in poverty as in the other countries, then our schools actually outperform, do better than most of the other countries. And so it's really child poverty that's driving the problems with education, at least the lower test scores, rather than failings in the schools in the first instance. I mean, we still have to address it through the schools, but the schools are actually doing pretty well given the circumstances.
Right. Healthcare is a huge issue, right? I mean, so much controversy over Obama's plan to try to have more people have health insurance, and you know, just extreme and vicious and unfair attacks. Most people that are attacking the program have no idea what it really consists of. But what do we need to do here? I mean, I think probably my position, I don't know about yours, but I would have been in favor of at least having a public option in there. I would have certainly been more in favor of going to a single payer Medicare for all kind of system, which most other countries in the world tend to have. But what do we need to do with regard to the health care issue, in your view?
Well, the first thing is that for the United States to have had in the past such a large percentage of our population with no kind of health insurance, that was just wrong. That was economically inefficient, and it was wrong for us as a democracy. So Obamacare, insofar as that dramatically reduces the percentage of people who don't have insurance, is I completely support it. You know, I think that a single payer option would be more economically efficient. That it would be cheaper, it would be easier to move to the quality improvements that we need. What we have today is largely a private sector system. And moving from a largely private sector system to single payer would be a big change, would be a big and difficult change.
Right.
So I think that it would be more efficient to do that, but it would also be difficult to do that. The healthcare
just
issue,
politically difficult.
Just politically difficult. Politically difficult. Well, politically, administratively.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a system that's designed on one structure and you're trying to change it, it takes a lot of work. You have to get a lot of things right to do that effectively.
But if we could make that transition, the overhead costs would be saved would be tremendous.
Indeed.
If we could accomplish it.
Indeed. But the healthcare issue brings up another issue, and that is the question of debt and the question of like the deficit and these issues. As a scholar of international development, I've seen a lot of countries around the world historically that when the governments become ineffective for one reason or another, one thing they often do is they load up on debt. You know, and this is, I think, an issue which the Republicans are you know, reasonably concerned about. If we look at our government, our country, the single largest issue that is going to be driving us into debt in the future is health care. That we have far and away the highest health care costs per person in the industrialized in the world. But our health outcomes, the actual health of our population, is less healthy. Than
paying more and getting less for it.
Paying more and getting less, right. So for the country, we've got to get this under control. I mean, Obamacare takes a positive step in getting most people insured. I'm sure that as it moves towards implementation, I'm sure there'll be some issues, some tweaks that have to be made. But it's going in the right direction. But it doesn't yet fully address the issue of healthcare inflation. And again, there's no silver bullet here. But to some extent, our society needs to focus more on positive health outcomes. We need to be sure that in our primary and secondary schools, that kids have a chance to have some exercise, you know, several times during the week, that they learn about healthy behaviors. I think that we've given our private sector food industry a little too much leeway to advertise things as being fun and exciting without giving the information on their health effects. Our medical system has to some extent been driven by an insurance system that rewards doctors for doing things, rewards doctors for ordering tests, for carrying out procedures, regardless of the health impact of those tests and procedures. And there have been a lot of studies done. I mean, we know how to improve these things, but we still have a system that's been built on these wrong incentives. So as a legislator, trying to address the issue of debt, trying to address the issue of the federal deficit, if we don't want Medicaid and Medicare and health costs to balloon, if we don't want our health costs, I mean, this affects corporations. Because if they're at the end of the day paying the health costs one way or another through taxes or through insurance or whatever of their employees. If we've got to get health costs under control, and there are ways to do that, and there are ways to improve the healthiness of our population, and that would certainly be one of my priorities. When we think about the debt and the deficit, we need to think about it partly in terms of not letting it get too big, but also in terms of the question of investment. You know, here in Michigan, we're seeing that it's hard to get the money for the roads. But economically, you know, if it's going to cost you a certain amount, but the economic benefit from having it is going to be greater than what it costs you, then you just ought to do it. You know, and if you're just, the Republican Party sometimes is so much against taxes that it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Right.
That we're not investing in the roads, the railways, the communications infrastructure, that if we had it, would allow companies to make more profit, would reduce costs for everybody.
And would raise revenues and reduce the deficit. And
raise revenues, reduce the deficit. Yeah, I mean, no one would think of, well, I'm not going to buy a house because it will put me into debt.
Right, right.
You know, because the house is an investment.
Yeah.
Well, the government needs to think that way too. We need to be making smart investments. You know, investments in good quality preschool, investments in good infrastructure. I mean, these are things where it's worth it to spend the money now, because if we don't, then the economy falls, other countries become more competitive than us, and it hurts us, you know, coming and going.
The old cliche, penny wise, pound foolish, seems to come to mind here with a lot of this investment.
Yeah.
Now, a big part of the whole issue concerning the federal debt and deficit is military spending.
Certainly.
Because we know that if you look at discretionary congressional spending, the monies that Congress has the ability to allocate, around 50%, give or take, depending which source you're looking at, but around 50% is a general estimate here of that is going toward warfare, toward the military.
Right.
And so we have probably, when you add it all together, about $1 trillion a year going toward military spending. And again, that's money that can't be invested in these other productive ways. So how do you get a handle on the military budget?
Yeah, good question. As I look towards being in the Congress, one thing I'm looking at is where are broad areas where we're just not using our resources wisely. And one is, I think we need to be putting more resources into education. Another is that our military spending is just out of line with what we need for our long-term security as a country.
Yeah.
That you probably know that almost half of world military spending comes from the United States.
Right.
You know, these last wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, how much have they really helped our security? You know, I don't think very much. The way we
probably jeopardized it more.
Probably has. The way we got our current military structure was with the idea that we need to be able to fight two major land wars at the same, fight and win, two major land wars in different parts of the world. You know, possibly with the idea of Japan and Germany in the background. But if you look at the challenges, the security challenges facing the country in the 21st century, that's probably not the security problem we're going to face. So the size of our Navy, the size of our Air Force and Army isn't needed, I don't believe. We need a smart and competent military, but putting that much of our resources into it when we're not investing in infrastructure, we're not investing in education, we're not investing in addressing climate change. And this one is really direct, because the military has told us that one of the biggest security threats they see in this century is the conflict arising from climate change. And we talked about this a little bit at the beginning. We didn't go too far into it then. But if we don't get climate change under control, we're going to be seeing widespread drought. We're going to be seeing many areas around the world where you currently have farmers, where because of less rainfall and more drought and warmer temperatures, they can't farm anymore.
Right.
So there'll be major population movements. We'll be seeing rising ocean levels and increasingly powerful storms that will be driving tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people out of their homes in low-lying areas, places like Bangladesh and certain places in Asia and Africa. And then these issues then lead to increased conflict, increased warfare, conflicts over water, conflicts over so many things. The World Bank has recently come out with a publication saying that if we let global warming to get beyond 3 degrees Celsius, which is where we're going, if we don't take care of it, we could easily be at 4 degrees Celsius warmer than historic levels by the end of the century. If we let it get past 3 degrees, the World Bank says, the problems are going to be so great that many governments of developing worlds are likely to collapse because they just can't deal with that. failed states, wars, a military problem. But the point is that it doesn't make sense to let that become a military problem for us,
Right.
where we have to be kind of a fortress to defend ourselves from all this chaos outside our walls. And economically, that would, of course, be terrible for us. If we can take the steps now, and they need to be taken today, they need to be taken straight away to address that climate change, then we can keep the global warming to just 2 degrees. And that's the target that the international community has agreed is. It's still going to be bad. It'll still be harmful, but it won't be so bad as if it goes so much worse. And that comes back to the budget, because if we're spending all that that $1 trillion a year on the military, when total world foreign aid today is $100 million a year, is 1/10 of that. Then if we just took 10% out of our military budget and put that into addressing the energy efficiency, addressing the problems from climate change around the world, helping to push our economy in an energy efficient direction, in terms of just security, that would be a wiser investment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that the Pentagon has identified climate change as the #1 national security threat in the future, that ought to be convincing to some of the folks on the other side who are talking that this is not a real threat. I mean, the Pentagon has identified this as a threat, that it is coming and it's real and it's going to have adverse consequences. So we need to start to take some action right now. And unfortunately, the Congress is blocking those kinds of actions right now. So.
Yeah, I don't know how much we're doing on time. Do we have time?
About 10 minutes left. About 10 minutes to go.
Yeah.
So,
because this is such an important issue for our congressman, because our congressman is playing such a harmful role here, could I take a few minutes to talk about this one?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Again, this is something where I think the American people haven't yet realized how serious the issue is.
Right.
And how urgent it is. The scientific community completely gets it. The scientific community can't believe that the policymakers are not taking further action, are not doing more than what they're doing today. Climate change, as we know, is driven mainly by carbon dioxide, mainly by the pollution from coal and oil and natural gas. And so it's the basis for a lot of our economy today. But we have the technology today with solar and with wind and with other renewable sources that here in the United States and worldwide, we could easily be providing all of our electricity, and within a short period, with a little bit more technology, we could provide all of the energies for cars and for heating, for other things, with today's technology. Well, in the last century and a half, with the onset of the Industrial Revolution, with all that carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, the world climate has got about 0.9 degrees warmer. The scary thing is that just in terms of the physics of it, the chemistry of it, climate change has its own momentum. So from the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases we've already put out into the atmosphere, even if we could stop it today, which we can't, we're already on the way to go from 0.9 degrees Celsius warmer to about 1.6 degrees warmer.
That's locked in.
That's already locked in. So last year we saw was the hottest, driest summer that the United States has ever known. We've been seeing Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina, more of these extreme weather events. A couple of years ago we saw Pakistan, where 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater. In Australia, the drought got to be so bad they had to invent new categories of drought, because it didn't fall within any other old categories. The bad news is that because all this is just from 0.9 degrees, and we already have locked in to 1.6 degrees, this is all going to get worse. That's already given. The issue is that if it goes, the international community has agreed that if it goes past 2 degrees, that's when it gets exponentially worse. The sea level rise, we could see it locked in You know, we have about maybe 10 inches of sea level rise today. We could have it locked in to 2 or 3 yards of sea level rise, which would then have terrible, I mean, that would flood out hundreds of millions of people. So if the 2 degrees Celsius goal is critical, well, it doesn't matter where these greenhouse gases come from. They all have the same effect. So there's exactly one way to solve this problem, one way to stop it at 2 degrees, and that is to get a strong international agreement where the governments of the world agree to cut their own emissions to a certain level. Well, to hit that 2 degrees target, if you do the math, it works out to 3 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per person per year. Today in the United States, we have 18 tons per person per year. Historically, we've contributed the most to the problem of climate change as a country, more than any other country. Well, China, about 6 or 7 years ago, they overtook us in their greenhouse gas emissions. So now they have more each year than we have, but per person, they're still between 7 and 8 tons per person. They have 4 times as many people. So they have a lot more total than what we have. But we've got to get ours from 18 tons to 3 tons by 2050. They've got to get theirs from 7 or 8 tons to 3 tons by 2050. These changes are fundamental. We have to start making these changes today if that's going to be even possible. The only way we can get that is with an agreement with all the countries on board. And the only way that is possible is with American leadership. We are the world superpower. We have the most technology. We have the most resources. We've contributed the most to the problem. We have to be the leader on this. I think we could get China to come on board. Barack Obama has told us in his recent speeches he wants to address climate change. But because it would require such significant changes in our economy, he cannot make the commitments for that international leadership without support from the Senate and from the House.
Right.
And because Fred Upton, our congressman in the House, is moving in the opposite direction. He's done everything he can to stop our government from moving forward in addressing climate change. He's stopping Obama from being able to play that leadership role. So, I mean, it's a complicated issue, but our congressman is stopping the world from addressing climate change.
Yeah. Paul, we just have a couple of minutes left. If people want to get involved in your campaign any way possible, how can they best do that?
Well, I need volunteers.
Yeah.
I need financial support. Upton's getting major contributions from the very companies he's supposed to be regulating. Please email me.
Do you have a website?
I have a web designer who's working on the website.
Right.
That should be up in a few weeks.
Okay.
My email address for my campaign is Paul. It's there on the screen.
They're on the screen right
Paul
now.
Clements at charter.net.
Okay. So if anybody is heard you talk today and is motivated to work on your campaign, then they can contact you that way. Well, I want to thank you for being on the program, and hopefully we can get you back and get some reports later on. We're still a long ways out, but what I like about your campaign is that you have really got it organized early on. I mean, the election is well over a year away yet, but it requires this kind of effort, especially to challenge a strong incumbent like Fred Upton. So we like what we're seeing from your campaign. We should also mention to folks that you and I work at the university on the climate change issue with an interdisciplinary humanities study group. And we are bringing Bill McKibben, who's the well-known environmental activist, to campus in October 10th. And so there'll be a lot more discussion in our community about the issue of climate change coming up with McKibben's visit. And we're in the process, you and me and some other folks, of organizing a number of other events related to that. So people should watch for those efforts to get involved in the campaign.
You know, as citizens, we need to know about this. And there'll be great opportunity for this in these programs in the fall.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Paul, thank you very much for being with us. And we'd like to invite you to join us next time on Critical Issues, Alternative Views. Don Cooney and Lynn Bartley will be back. And we'll see you again with another edition. Thanks.
And thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Paul.